Big technology companies have so much going on at any given time that a journalist can tell any type of story they want to about it. Depending on what angle you observe the company from, you can write a story depicting that company as good, evil, growing, or about to crash. The truth only becomes apparent to outsiders with time. Amazon's culture and business strategy were detailed in The Everything Store, a 2013 book by Brad Stone. I read The Everything Store before working at Amazon, and then I read it a second time after working at Amazon. The book is an accurate and balanced depiction of Amazon's ethos. Brad's new book, The Upstarts, documents the rise of Uber and Airbnb, two companies with a similar controversial valence to Amazon. It was a pleasure to speak to Brad because I admire his engrossing storytelling as an author and his strategic analysis as a business journalist. After discussing business and technology with him, we explored journalism. Brad is a senior executive editor at Bloomberg, and it was a real treat to talk to him. Indeed Prime flips the typical model of job search and makes it easy to apply to multiple jobs and get multiple offers. Indeed Prime simplifies your job search and helps you land that ideal software engineering position from companies like Facebook or Uber or Dropbox. Candidates get immediate exposure to top companies with just one simple application to Indeed Prime. And the companies on Prime's exclusive platform message the candidates with salary and equity up front. Indeed Prime is 100% free for candidates. There are no strings attached. Sign up now and help support Software Engineering Daily by going to Indeed.com/SEDaily. That's Indeed.com/SEDaily if you're looking for a job and want a simpler job search experience. You can also put money in your pocket by referring your friends and colleagues. Refer a software engineer to the platform and get $200 when they get contacted by a company, and $2,000 when they accept a job through Prime. You can learn more about this at Indeed.com/prime/referral. That's Indeed.com/prime/referral for the Indeed referral program. Thanks to Indeed for being a continued sponsor of Software Engineering Daily. If I ever leave the podcasting world and need to find a job once again, Indeed Prime will be my first stop. Brad Stone is the author of The Upstarts and The Everything Store. Brad, welcome to Software Engineering Daily.
Thank you, Jeff.
I worked as an engineer for Amazon for 8 months, and I read your book, The Everything Store, which is about Amazon, before I started. I left Amazon 19 months ago, and then I read your book again last month. And when I compare my perception of the book before and after I worked at Amazon, I'm struck by how well you captured the company. When you look back on that book, are there any specific areas of Amazon or Jeff Bezos that are still a mystery to you?
Well, I mean, first of all, thank you for the double read. The main thing is I feel like it is in some ways a different company. I mean, when that book originally came out at the end of 2013, I mean, the market cap is, I think, 3 times what it was back then. And they've grown in 2 significant areas. One into artificial intelligence with Alexa, and then 2 into physical retail, which is so surprising. Sprouting not just these bookstores all over the country, but now a whole new set of grocery stores to try to stimulate their Amazon Fresh business. None of that's particularly surprising. I mean, Amazon, as you maybe even experienced, thrives on internal competition. So, if you have a healthy e-commerce business, the thing to do is to start a whole other division of physical retail to go compete with them for the best way to serve customers. I guess, it is amazing to me that a company that was fundamentally like an online retail company and then even a cloud services company, they keep expanding along these other dimensions. So, how Amazon competes for and retains artificial talent in AI when they're going against Google and Microsoft and these other giants is remarkable.
And how do you think they do that? Because Google and Facebook offer perks and perks and perks, And if you work at Amazon, you get Lord of the Flies, basically. That's right. So how do they retain so many people? What is their differentiating strength from the outside looking in?
Well, I mean, as your 8th month tenure, shows that they don't retain everyone, right? There's high turnover, but that senior leadership team is remarkably consistent. They've got a couple things. They've got that equity, that has been going up in value, and that's of course a lure. But then they have the secret weapon, which is Jeff. I mean, people want to work with him, and he runs a large organization, but he gets very involved in things that excite him. And over the years, that has been Kindle, and back in the day, it was like the new jewelry category, and now it's very, very clearly you can see where he is making his impact is in robotics and drones and AI and Alexa. And so I guess if you're an AI researcher and you have Jeff Bezos himself making the hard sell, he's very involved in these divisions. I would say, Larry Page at Alphabet is maybe more of a remote presence across the company. But, you go and you work in the Alexa division at Amazon, I would imagine you're spending a fair amount of time with one of the smartest people in the world. And that's a draw.
When you think about it from a business management perspective, having studied a lot of different companies, what do you think are the pros and cons of those two approaches? The sort of the great leader approach, where you are relying on the presence of the great leader, versus the more institutionalized sensibilities that a place like Google might have.
I mean, it feels like Amazon does both, right? They have, they have a set of values and a culture that does kind of incentivize ground up innovation, but then at the same time you've got the innovator in chief who kind of comes in and makes his presence felt, sometimes in uncomfortable ways. So you can't argue with the results at Amazon. As a retail business that spawned an enterprise computing arm, and now it has spawned an AI division and a robotics division, and they come up with a lot of great stuff, even though the culture gets criticized for being hard driving and kind of relentless. So, but look, I mean, the Google approach works well. I mean, Apple's a good example of a company that really did have a top-down, fearless leader culture. And of course, after Steve Jobs died, had to evolve. You can criticize them for maybe not coming up with a strong second act after the iPhone, but the company's financial performance has been pretty stellar. And obviously the iPhone, is more popular than ever. So yeah, I mean, I think there's lots of different models. And the tech companies all kind of embody different flavors.
One thing I noticed at Amazon, and I certainly saw this reinforced reading your book the 2 times I read it, was long-term thinking basically as a religion within Amazon. Do you think that's an overstatement? And do you think that are there other companies that have this ability to think long-term to the degree that Amazon has been able to?
I would say that everybody wants to do it, and everyone has the religion to some degree. I mean, you could say it started with Amazon, but really it was like Warren Buffett before him, and the mentality is around and popular, but you kind of need license to do it. You need permission to do it from your investors, really. And Bezos was just very smart very early on in kind of signaling that this was going to be the approach that he wanted to take in that first shareholder letter. And anyone who wasn't interested could just go away, could get off the bus. And so, Amazon, you see them missing quarters, you see the stock will dip after an earnings report. There is some volatility, and then people come back, and the big shareholders are relatively stable. And it's because they kind of understand. Now, you have to be able to do that, right? If you're Walmart right now getting buffeted, or let's say Verizon, getting buffeted by, your shifts in investor sentiment around your stock price. If the CEO is just to say, well, we have a long-term, vision, we're building things for the next 5 years, investors probably aren't gonna go along with that. That's not who their investor class is, and they want they want to see kind of gradual progress. And so you have these CEOs that end up managing quarter to quarter. But, Jeff is in this unique category of being kind of the founder operator. I would say Mark Zuckerberg is there, Larry Page is there, and they're just given more leeway, more room to run. So they can say they're long-term oriented. They can do it. Jeff probably spends only a few hours with investors all year. Very limited, and and he really doesn't care and doesn't have to care. He's a huge shareholder in the company too. So there's a lot of different elements that allow him to not only have the religion but to implement it.
The boomerang investors that leave Amazon and then they come back to it, that seems to mirror the employee base. You have all these employees where you look at their resume, it's like 3 years at Amazon and then like 2 years elsewhere and then another 8 years at Amazon.
Jeff, are you foreshadowing your next career move?
I'm absolutely not. I will never be back at Amazon. But my criticisms of Amazon are so different than ones I read. So I thought your book was very impartial, and I think that's the word to use. But this notorious piece that came out of the New York Times, Inside Amazon, Wrestling Big Ideas in a Bruising Workplace. This was the super famous Amazon article out of the New York Times by David Streitfeld and a co-author of his. Did you feel that this article was disjoint with the material in your book, or did you feel it was a compliment?
Good question. No, I mean, I felt like I had flagged some other things, but maybe been a little less framed it in a little bit less of a adversarial way. And not to say that the Times didn't hedge a bit as well in that piece, but you have to sort of start by acknowledging that one, it's an achievement culture, right? The company has done amazing things and does succeed in its primary goal, which is to serve customers. And two, that you can't necessarily make broad judgments based on anecdotes. You can find people at every company that have had hard experiences. I'm sure there are employees of Bloomberg that have cried at their desks. And yet, to make kind of sweeping generalizations about them, I think, the anecdotes can be interesting and they can tell you something about the overall character of a company. But for every person who has been unhappy at Amazon, you could probably find someone who, has had a very fulfilling career there. So I don't know. I mean, I think I raised some of the same issues about how hard driving that culture can be. But maybe I was a little more careful. And the other thing is, since that it's such a large company now, there are so many different kinds of experiences. I think culture at AWS is a lot different than culture in retail. Culture in an area where Jeff has a particular interest, Jeff Bezos, is probably, life there is a lot more uncomfortable than if you're in one of the other parts of the business that he, maybe sees once a year. And so, it's really not, I don't know what you think about this, but it never felt to me as I was looking at it that it was a one-size-fits-all culture. Things that are sort of common traits across the organization, but lots of different kinds of experiences.
Your application sits on layers of dynamic infrastructure and supporting services. Datadog brings you visibility into every part of your infrastructure, plus APM for monitoring your application's performance. Dashboarding, collaboration tools, and alerts let you develop your own workflow for observability and incident response. Datadog integrates seamlessly with all of your apps and systems, from Slack to Amazon Web Services, so you can get visibility in minutes. Go to softwareengineeringdaily.com/Datadog to get started with Datadog and get a free t-shirt. With full observability, distributed tracing, and customizable visualizations, Datadog is loved and trusted by thousands of enterprises, including Salesforce, PagerDuty, and Zendesk. If you haven't tried Datadog at your company or on your side project, go to softwareengineeringdaily.com/Datadog to support Software Engineering Daily and get a free t-shirt. Our deepest thanks to Datadog for being a new sponsor of Software Engineering Daily. It is only with the help of sponsors like you that this show is successful. So thanks again. I think the things that are present across the organization, broadly speaking, are those management principles. I don't know how much time you spent looking at those and scrutinizing them, but those were fundamental to how Amazon works, these management principles. And I've ended up asking a lot of other companies, when I do interviews like these, like, so do you have these management principles? And, before you work at a tech company or maybe before you study them, you think these things are like anodyne, bland, useless phrases.
Well, they are at a lot of companies, but not at Amazon.
Not at Amazon.
Yeah. And some of those, like disagree and commit, are specifically tuned to kind of create a sense of discomfort in the organization. Like Jeff, never wanted the company to turn into a country club where people just got comfortable and coasted. And he also thought that there's like this human inclination to just get along with people, and that probably sounds good, right? We should all be singing in harmony, but he believed that stood in the way of like finding out the truth. And so this thing that's in one of those principles, social cohesion, he feels like can be harmful to a company, that you should meetings should be combative, there should be disagreement, you should be able to disagree with your boss. And so some of these things that he built into the company are the things that maybe the press points to as making the place an uncomfortable one to work.
Speaking of the press, the Everything Store, your book, seemed like such a balanced take. And you hear Bezos say things like, quote unquote, I think he said, quote, we should be scrutinized. I think he said that, I don't remember what the interview was, but he was talking about, I think Trump, like Trump's response to the press. But, and obviously he loves journalism because he wouldn't have bought the Washington Post otherwise. But Amazon has this allergy to journalists, or just doesn't deal with journalists. Is there some kind of disconnect there?
I think there's a nice little paradox because he is the owner of the Post, which has been very aggressive in its coverage of President Trump, and very admirable, I think, in the way it covered the campaign and the administration, and then Amazon is so. Is so difficult to cover, provides so little access and transparency, is extremely competitive organization in very competitive markets. And so really kind of counts its perspective on things and its future plans as company secrets. When Jeff prefers to kind of talk for the company almost alone. I mean, Andy Jassy gets some attention and some other executives you'll hear from, but really, basically Jeff is the face of the company. And yet when he does talk, it's sort of unsatisfying, and he can repeat the same thing again and again over the years. And
it's a Jeffism.
Right, a Jeffism.
No, that's an obfuscation.
Yeah. And he says that, well, we're just misunderstood. But it's not like he's done a great job of helping people understand. I don't think he wants journalists to understand the company. I think that's a great paradox. You could say that the president has an obligation to the people to be transparent, whereas the company really doesn't. If anything, it has an obligation to its shareholders to create value, and sometimes that is done just by being very discreet. And as with all things, Amazon's very good at that.
Your book was basically chronicling Amazon, but I feel like if you would have had the chance to chronicle Bezos more, you would have. My sense is that this guy is infinitely cagey. Certainly, like if you compare him to like Elon Musk. I mean, Elon Musk's in that Ashley Vance book. Did you read that book?
Well, he actually works with me, and
right. Yeah. So you at least talk to him, but I mean, Musk was fairly open with that book, or as far as we know, he was fairly open. I think we know he's at the level of caginess of Bezos also, but he was very open with his biography, although there were certain parts of it that were extremely shadowy. But Bezos kind of the same, like actually probably to a much higher degree, the degree of shadowiness, like, or I don't know, were you exposed
discretion,
to...
I would say.
Discretion.
Right.
I don't want to put a negative spin on it.
And discipline.
It's totally understood.
And discipline.
Yes.
I just think, like, Jeff is he's still writing the story of his life, and he's looking forward, and he's got his goal on the next product and the next service, and and probably doesn't see much value in revisiting the past. But now he did talk to me. He let me talk to his colleagues, some members of his family, but they were all fairly disciplined. And so it was like years of chiseling out stories and truth from other people, often those who had left Amazon. but like that book is, I feel like a Jeff biography as well, and there were fascinating parts of his early life that I discovered, and and some of his side interests, like in space, that were just so fascinating to me. But the funny thing is, like, the biography of the company and the biography of the man are in some ways the same thing, right? The company is his life's work, and its identity is really his identity.
Okay, let's get into Uber. So your newest book is The Upstarts. It's about Uber and Airbnb. You published this book right before there were several controversies that erupted out of Uber. These were stories about Uber's culture being cutthroat and sexist, stories about its self-driving technology that acquired through Auto eventually being stolen by Google, which... there was an article this morning that sort of shed a little more light on that. Stolen, maybe an overuse of the word steal, or we'll get into that. But given what you learned about the company from writing your book, and then the volume of information that came out right after that, were you surprised by that knowledge?
No, I mean, I think that a lot of it is in the book. The fact that this is a company that grew from 500 employees to 11,000 in the span of 2 years. They did that without creating the guardrails of a professional HR organization. They were focused very much on just building the team with a sort of God-given mission. They felt that they were improving transportation in a lot of cities. And, and like in the book, I do chronicle some of the cultural things that they did, where they would bring employees to parties in Las Vegas or Miami. And there were some people that felt uncomfortable by that. Certainly, if you add alcohol to the mix, these are not situations that lend themselves to very professional interactions, but it's also a startup, where people were living and fighting and working together every single day. And I think they kind of got lost in what the needs were when you build a professional organization at scale. So, I just said, vis-a-vis Amazon, that we can't really judge a company by its worst anecdotes. And I think like the sexual harassment allegation, while awful, what that person experienced, it's like, there are women in leadership positions at Uber, and I don't think it's a universal experience. But clearly it showed, and Uber owned up to, some serious deficiencies in the way they had built their HR organization. So that's one piece. I think the second piece is Travis fighting with the driver, which we published here at Bloomberg. And, and he, that's just like, what is he doing there? When you sort of assume that everyone's got a dash cam these days, and the drivers are his customers.
You could never imagine Jeff Bezos doing that.
That's a lack of discipline right there. And so, Uber's now in the mode of falling on their swords, and he went and said he was going to go hire a COO, which is a story we're obviously covering pretty closely. Then the third piece is the Google-Uber legal battle over the driverless car technology. And on that one, Business Week has a cover story out about the roots of that. And, I would say, one thing is that we've heard one part of the story, right? Google has filed a claim, and, Uber will at some point file a counterclaim. And the fact pattern that Google presented looks bad for Uber. I mean, it sounds like, that Anthony Lewandowski, who left Google and went to Uber, brought along some technology, but it's also true, as the cover story in Business Week shows, that Lewandowski was kind of LiDAR at Google, and some of it, and it was sort of hazy because he had a lot of startups on the side, what was his and what was the company's.
Right. Yeah. So what you're talking about, Anthony Lewandowski is a genius. This guy is not just a thief of information. He's been working intensely on self-driving technology for like a decade.
I mean, in some ways, he's the father of the industry.
Right. The father of the industry. Like, you have Sebastian Thrun, who is more of an academic character, who Lewandowski studied under, basically. And then for the last 10 years, Lewandowski has been, like, sort of had one foot in Google, one foot in whatever business he's been working on, and he's just, like, trying to get self-driving to market, almost in effect. I mean, this is why he's sort of a nice spiritual cohort to Travis Kalanick, certainly not a COO, but he's a cohort, and it makes a lot of sense that such an executor would want to go to Uber. Of course, but if we talk about the Otto case, is the way that Otto was structured where she sort of talked to Travis I think before he left Google, and then Otto was started and it was acquired. Is that a smoking gun, or does Otto just look like a thing that he started and he was trying to get some optionality, trying to get his valuation up?
Right. So what we're talking about is the timeline when Anthony Lewandowski left Google, started a self-driving truck company, Otto, and then Uber bought it. And as we reported in the story, the timeline is hazy, and Anthony may have been visiting Uber before he really started Otto. And maybe even Travis and Anthony had decided that Uber was going to buy Otto, perhaps even before or right after Anthony left Google. So let me just unpack that and say, sort of simply, I think there are two possible scenarios. Okay, and we'll need to find a little bit more about which is the right one. To me, it seems more likely that this was a way for Uber really to just financially reward Anthony on par with what with his enormous skill set and what driverless car researchers and leaders in the field could command. I mean, this is a field where lots of companies are interested, and he's a pioneer. And I think, the timeline shows that perhaps what they were doing is like, giving him a real kind of payout to go and join another company as opposed to just starting something himself. Now, the other possibility, the more darker scenario, is that this was a little bit of a conspiracy to go and kind of cleanse this IP. To me, that's a little bit more of a stretch. That's certainly, I think, what Google's asserting. But it's more likely that if there's a sort of quiet conspiracy, it's, instead of coming to Uber and getting some options that may or may not be worth anything, we want to make this worth your while. We want you to come work for Uber. Why don't you start this company and we'll buy it? And, this is going to be an enormously lucrative transaction for you. Tom, are you buying that?
I think it's only time will tell. Both of the scenarios you presented are plausible. I think, the more I think about it, the conspiracy to start Otto with the knowledge that it would get acquired to cleanse the IP, I don't think Uber and Lewandowski would be that sloppy, but I think it is, I don't know, or maybe they are, and they were just like, well, Google will never go after us, but I don't know. It's all hearsay.
Well, two things. One, Lewandowski was saying all along, asserting in interviews that the, quote, IP was clean. So he knew that the potential charge was out there. He has said in interviews, even last year, that this is all my stuff and has nothing to do with Google. So he knew that they were susceptible to that accusation. And then, number two, I mean, let's put this in perspective, that Google right now is at the risk of being, in the phrase of a quote from the Business Week story, seen as the Xerox PARC of driverless cars, right? Yeah. The organization that
First
really
mover disadvantage.
Initiated all this interest, but then has failed to capitalize on it. And so I think they're operating right now from a position of weakness, and they see a lot of the momentum shifting not only to Uber but to Tesla and Baidu, which is working on this as well. And there's probably a little bit of animosity there that they have suffered from a lot of defections, a lot of the energy in self-driving cars moving elsewhere. So I think that plays into it as well.
I thought it was interesting that Lewandowski left Google because of the, quote, slow pace of innovation, and he was uniquely enticed to join Uber. And it's easy for people to criticize Uber for the fast and risky culture, but this was actually something that attracted Lewandowski, although maybe this fast and riskiness will undermine that too. But I don't know, interesting trade-off there. So one thing I see when I'm looking at these different companies like Uber and Amazon and Facebook and Google is that the company culture is informed by the marginal profits of the company. So if you look at Facebook and Google, the company culture is luxurious because the profit margins are so high. You sell bits on the internet, you control the advertising industry, it's a really good place to be, you make tons and tons of money, so you can have a luxurious culture. At Amazon, I think if you build a retail business off of super low margins, the only way to compel people to stay there for a long time and to have vision, to be motivated, is to have this long-term vision where you're like, okay, yeah, the stock price is just going to go up and up and up and up and up. It's a low-margin business, though. How do the profit margins of Uber shape its company culture? Because this also seems like a business like Amazon, where it's ultimately low-margin commodity business differentiating on technology or network effects.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think in a lot of ways, Amazon is the model for Uber. And it's not just low profit margins. It's the fact that what they do is essentially a commodity. Amazon never really had a big advantage. Anyone could sell books. Anybody could sell toys. You were really only, your relationship with your customer was only as good as like the last experience they had with you. If you met your promises and fulfilled their expectations, and they would come to you again. And there's a little bit of stickiness over the fact that you've got their credit card information and they're familiar with your site. But it's not that the switching costs aren't that high. So it's two things. It's the fact that you don't have a big advantage, and the profit margin is low. And so Amazon created a culture, tuned to moving fast and constantly expanding the breadth of offerings, and then doubling down on the lock-in. Like Prime is all designed around lock-in, particularly for a phase in the company history when they didn't have the sales tax advantage. So they were losing a little bit of the pricing advantage that they had. And so Prime, kind of obfuscates the price of things and, just creates like this obligation to shop at Amazon. Uber, yeah, I mean, it's funny. They're a private company, so we don't quite know what the profit margins are. Like Amazon, it generates a lot of cash. They funnel that free cash flow back into expanding the business into new markets. We've reported that they're unprofitable. But I think, if you take San Francisco or London, it's a profitable company. Like, we don't yet know how big the margins are. But again, like Lyft or Addison Lee in London, like these are options that are really as good.
Yeah.
There's a little stickiness around putting the app on there, but like there really isn't a technology advantage. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think the culture then becomes similar at like high volume, low margin, inventing new things, trying in constant search of creating lock-in.
What are the opportunities for a moat at Uber?
Well, it's funny. I think they have constantly talked about ways to use technology to improve the customer experience that I don't really see much of a difference yet. Developing their own maps so they could make the driving experience easier for drivers, or the pickup experience easier for passengers. But Lyft is doing a very good job innovating along those lines as well. And it's really not clear that Uber Maps will deliver that much greater value than Google Maps. I mean, they say, that Google Maps aren't really made for drivers and passengers meeting each other on the side of the road. And so they can develop something differently. And they have been investing a lot of money in that. If that's a moat, it's probably a relatively shallow one. What else can we think of?
The logistics network idea?
Well, here's another one.
The last mile logistics.
I was going to go pool, like that can scale deliver a moat, because when you've got more drivers and more riders, you can do things on top of your network. Logistics and food delivery are one, but also carpooling and commuting together is another. But the thing is like, in a lot of markets, the Lyfts or Ola in India are now big enough, even if they're the second player, to deliver some of those same add-on services. It's interesting. Uber Food, they call it Uber Eats, was always talked about as like another thing you could do with the network. But in a lot of cities, they're using different kinds of drivers, because you can't put cars on the road with food. You'd have nowhere to park. So you've got motorbikes or bicycles in a lot of cities. So I don't know. I think I think it's one of the challenges of their business that that they haven't really created a differentiator. Now, capital has been the differentiator. Like, they have raised so much money that and then they go and subsidize the rides, and in a way they sort of punish the second the competition, because they'll lose money more painfully if they go and match the prices. But Lyft has done a great job differentiating on brand, and a lot of people, maybe it's more here in the tech bubble, but a lot of people see them as the kinder, friendlier, gentler alternative, even though they're doing the exact same things.
As a consumer of the services, do you think that's accurate, or is that just branding? Because I'll say the Uber drivers I have seem pretty nice.
I think it's 90% branding. I mean, if anything, Lyft was more aggressive, as I talk about in the book. Lyft was more aggressive in propagating the legally ambiguous idea of ride sharing than Uber was at the beginning. And then Uber kind of took it and ran with it. But John Zimmer and Logan Green, the founders of Lyft, would never be caught yelling at a driver. Not only are they do they have kind of different personalities, but I actually think that they, every business needs some idealism, and the idealism around ride sharing is all around eliminating traffic and taking cars off the road. And they come to that idealism a little more organically. Logan Green was working on this stuff in 15 years ago in Santa Barbara when he was in college. And Travis Kalanick at Uber kind of adopted some of the rhetoric when he heard Lyft talking about it. And so I think being ruthless but also being idealistic is the sweet spot. Jeff Bezos does it very well, and I think the idealism of Uber has always seemed a little more superficial than the idealism of Lyft.
Do you think it's a binary outcome where either Uber finds a moat, whether it's self-driving cars or a logistics network or something else, flying cars? Is it either they find a moat and they succeed, or they fall completely on their face and go bankrupt, or is there a middle ground? I
think there's a middle ground. I think that we're often maybe in the press mistaking Lyft's success for Uber's failure, the same in India and China. And the fact is that this is an exploding market that has increased opportunity for drivers everywhere dramatically. This was a supply that was capped by regulation and served customers very poorly, the taxi industry, and these companies have sort of unleashed supply. I know, and then increased demand and motivated a lot of people to leave their cars at home, carpool to work. And I don't even know that we've reached the upper limit of what these companies can do in a lot of cities. And so, I think there's room for multiple players. There's not just one taxi company in every town. Now, the question is, I think, is more in the in the middle. What does it mean for Uber's valuation? And that's a whole other discussion. But if this is a $70 billion company, were they betting on a monopoly? I think it'll be a fairly large business, and if they go public and the valuation declines, it might be sort of framed temporarily as a disaster, and some of the late stage investors that didn't get protections might take a little bit of a haircut. And that valuation is pretty high, right? And so, I guess the question is when we get into driverless cars in 5 or 10 years, does that become a winner-take-all scenario if you've got one network that has managed to get the technology right? And that's why we're seeing Uber invest in it so heavily, because they have to be part of that conversation.
Airbnb seems like a company that thinks long-term. That is another company that is framed in your book, The Upstarts. Just to get right into it, the big bet that Airbnb is placing right now is on, quote, experiences. Do you have a picture in your head for how this fits into a big long-term play? Because you look at Airbnb and you're like, okay, wow, they're doing this incredible thing with space, and you could imagine them going into all kinds of things like real estate or data on real estate, but they go into experiences. Do you have a picture for how that fits into the long term?
Yeah, I mean, the mission of the company is to create a more authentic travel experience for people. They'll say you belong anywhere. And it is true, I think, that travel for a lot of people is staying in a hotel that could be anywhere and going and visiting the tourist, the tourist traps of a particular city. And so, I like the idea of experiences, to be able to go and have a marketplace of really authentic, legitimate, fun, highly rated things to do in a place that make you feel like you've actually visited there and interacted with the people, as opposed to just sitting at the top of a double-decker bus looking at the sights. I mean, maybe you want to do a little bit of both, but and there's also a part of the vision of trips that maybe creates tourist destinations out of cities that you maybe otherwise wouldn't visit. Like, I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. I cannot imagine that it's very high on anybody's travel list. But, lots of cool history and, immigrants to Ohio, like, amazing neighborhoods and history and places to eat. And so, you might not find that in a guidebook. Can you create a marketplace of things to do in a place like Detroit or Cleveland that makes those interesting places to visit? And so, it's also, I think, they're releasing it at an interesting time. Like, the home sharing category might be slowing down a little bit. A lot of cities have placed regulatory limits on how many nights somebody can share their home. In places like San Francisco, the city's gotten very strict about people listing on Airbnb more than one property at a time. They don't want illegal hoteliers going and having a network of a dozen places and taking those places off the housing market. And Airbnb over the years has had to be a little bit of a better, stricter enforcer of these laws. Early on, it sort of said, well, who are we to be policemen? And now they've got to, put up or shut up, so to speak. Right. And so Trips, I think, is an expansion of their platform at a time when maybe the opportunity of their core business is slowing down a little bit.
Okay. And it probably makes more sense to lever up into something in the travel industry where it's a little safer, little weaker competition, less complex business than getting into something like real estate or commercial.
Well, they might do that too.
They might do it eventually.
Yeah. The thing is, and it is a big challenge, they need to create, I would say the original business was like a global marketplace. Yeah. You had visitors traveling and hosts and cities, and the thing kind of went by itself. This is a much larger challenge. They've got two double-sided marketplaces that they have to create in every city, in hundreds of cities around the world, stimulating tour operators and restaurateurs and gallery owners to go and list experiences on their platform, and then they've got to get a customer set who is fairly acclimated to using Airbnb in one way to expand their conception of the company. So it's interesting. It's really ambitious, and once again they turn to Amazon as a model. It's so funny how it's Apple and not. It's Amazon, not Apple, Bezos, not Jobs, that has become kind of the canonical entrepreneur and tech company of our time. And Airbnb says this is akin to Amazon going from books to everything.
You are building a data-intensive application. Maybe it involves data visualization, a recommendation engine, or multiple data sources. These applications often require data warehousing, glue code, lots of iteration, and lots of frustration. The Exaptive Studio is a rapid application development studio optimized for data projects. It minimizes the code required to build data-rich web applications and maximizes your time spent on your expertise. Go to exaptive.com/sedaily to get a free account today. That's exaptive.com/sedaily. The Exaptive Studio provides a visual environment for using back-end, algorithmic, and front-end components. Use the open source technologies you already use, but without having to modify the code, unless you want to, of course. Access a k-means clustering algorithm without knowing R, or use complex visualizations, even if you don't know D3. Spend your energy on the part that you know well, and less time on the other stuff. Build faster and create better. Go to exaptive.com/sedaily for a free account. Thanks to Exaptive for being a new sponsor of Software Engineering Daily. It's a pleasure to have you on board as a new sponsor. One of my favorite stories that you shed light on in this book is the Samwer brothers story. These are these German brothers that have been making a lot of money from standing up businesses that are clones of other businesses. I think their first couple were they cloned eBay in a German market or European market. Then they cloned, what was it, Groupon.
They've cloned everybody.
They cloned everybody, right.
Yeah.
They did not successfully clone Airbnb. The narrative is that they failed to successfully copy it because it was a community and they don't understand that you can't copy community. They don't understand community. Do you have a more general thesis about what are the kinds of internet businesses that can be copied and which ones can't?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think like this idea of they didn't get the community right was a little bit of spin, because Airbnb does like to, call attention to its community. But we can say that and acknowledge that some of that community are folks that, are just pure commercial operators and don't really want to be part of any community. But, I think also like the character of their business, probably hurt the SAMWers. So Airbnb, as I just said, is like a global network. And you fundamentally, on one side of the network, have people that are crossing borders and traveling. And, Airbnb started with a position of strength in the U.S. and U.S. travelers, when they go to Europe, they were just going to open the Airbnb app. So already Airbnb had a fairly large advantage. I also think we talk about the balance between idealism and ruthlessness, that the SAMWers just were really like lopsided on the side of ruthlessness. Like there wasn't really enough of a mission there about what they were trying to accomplish, why people should buy into it. And
from an employee point of view.
From an employee point of view. And I paint this picture in the book of like their army of ants, young people just soldiering away in these super hot warehouses over their computers, basically like with Airbnb open on one browser screen and the SAMWers website on another, kind of copying features. And it's a bad way to run a business. And I think Silicon Valley for a long time allowed itself to be held hostage by this approach. And, maybe it wasn't really as much the wisdom of Airbnb, although I think that they handled it very well, but they could look at how badly the Groupon integration was going with the company that Groupon had acquired from the SAMWers, or, and say, this model hasn't really worked all that well. Right. It hasn't served these companies well to just go acquire their clone and use that as an international vehicle for international expansion. So it's almost like Silicon Valley had developed some scar tissue around this approach, and Airbnb benefited from it.
Now, by the way, I think that the difference between average Silicon Valley company, or you take like Google, and SAMWer Brothers running a hot warehouse of developers that are cloning a website, I don't think that the difference there is as big as it seems, because basically Google says, okay, let's pay this big fixed cost of air conditioning, beanbag chairs, catered food. Like ultimately all that stuff is a fixed cost, and then they get the best engineers in the world, and they get to make huge margins off of them. But we don't need to go into that. But I want to talk about journalism with you a bit, because I've kind of gotten into the journalism business since kind of leaving engineering. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on in journalism right now, and one thing I notice is that historically there's been kind of a partitioning of journalists into silos, whether we're talking about the publication that they work for or the type of material that they write about. But I look at a journalist like you or Kara Swisher or Ezra Klein, and there seems to be a multifaceted ability to report on stuff where, it doesn't matter. Like, if you were reporting on politics, I would read your stuff. If Kara Swisher is reporting on politics, I read her stuff. And if you're reporting on tech, then I'll read that. Is this a new thing? Like, are we seeing the rise of a polyglot personality of journalist?
Well, thank you for including me in that very esteemed group. It is true that at one point we had more narrowly defined lanes. You were a magazine writer or you were a newspaper writer. And I think it's led by the interest of the reader, the subscriber, and the fact that like we're all sort of reinventing ourselves as digital media swarms or subsumes analog media, and we're trying to figure out new ways to create things. Like, I don't consider myself to be a natural podcaster or radio person, but I have a podcast. We do a decrypted podcast at Bloomberg. I was always uncomfortable with the idea of being on TV, but like, you got to do it now. And so I go and do it. And, I think it's like the media, the mediums have converged, and we're trying to we're trying to entice our readers at a time where there's an explosion of competition for their time and attention. It's like we're all now, the landscape has become our Twitter and Facebook feeds. And so we're all sort of waving our arms furiously saying, hey, pay a little bit of attention to me right now. And, that's not going to be a 3,000 word story often. Sometimes it might be. But sometimes it's a little video clip or a little, or an audio podcast for somebody's drive. You're trying to grab people when you can grab them. So it's, if anything, folks like Kara Swisher and Ezra Klein have done that with remarkable sort of fluidity. And it's hard. It's exhausting. It's it takes a certain kind of talent, I think, to go and do the acrobatics required to be fluent in all these different mediums. I really do find it to be completely exhausting. But it's like the game that that we're playing now.
I did ask you this before the show, though. You're having fun, though, right?
Yeah, it is fun. It is. It's definitely fun. The idea that we get to experiment now and be sort of media innovators is a lot of fun. It's a treadmill, though. It never stops. So when I started at Newsweek magazine back in the day, and you did a story and you got it into the magazine, which was difficult because there was a lot of competition, you took a victory lap. There was a week where you didn't pitch anything. You just basked in the glow. And now, the glow expires in about 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And it's what's next?
Well, the treadmill's always there to run.
It's always there. The treadmill is always there. So I think actually you need to be careful about it. And I kind of counsel other journalists this too. Burnout-wise and mental health-wise. And, there is something about this attention and the ease with which we will now get feedback, or we will know how many people read our stuff, that, it's just back in the day, you really didn't know, you were sort of spitting into the rain, and there was some vague sense that, your magazine was delivered to the doorstep of the power brokers, and that was enough. And of course, the world read everything. And now you really don't. You know pretty
now
specifically.
You're a power broker.
Well, you know pretty specifically who is or who isn't reading that thing. And so the constant clawing for attention, I think, is a little destructive.
Well, it doesn't have to be, right? It's destructive if you let it be. It's destructive if you let it cater to your id.
I would say that
whichever one of those.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are certain journalists that perhaps have, under that limelight, have allowed it to kind of change their sensibilities, right. And they almost abandoned their role as journalists and become kind of professional pontificators, existing only in the bubble of social media. And I personally never have wanted to do that.
Yeah. So, the New York Times, the Washington Post, Bloomberg, what is the value of the vaunted institution these days? Why don't all the best reporters just strike out on their own, set up Patreon channels? Why doesn't that happen?
Well, these are powerful platforms with global reach. They can pay you, which is important. So there's a guaranteed income. There are health benefits. A place like Bloomberg, we've got a TV channel and resources to do, resources to do multimedia in a way that feels
those things
well,
now,
in a
right?
way that feels professional. And not to say that this of course is a very professional operation, but you can tell the difference between something that's well produced and has TV.
But do
values.
people even want that? Do they want professionalism or do they want authenticity?
That's a good question. I mean, ideally, you give them both. I think professionalism still counts, but if we're staring into the teeth of the unbundling of the cable networks, and that maybe we are going to be veering in the direction of authenticity,
especially if you look at Donald Trump as the leading indicator.
Yeah. I mean, there's a fine line between authenticity and Wayne and Garth. It has to be.
Like a kind of from the basement.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I think that the news organizations, and I think the great sort of sadness right now is that the list that you just made of the Times and the Washington Post and Bloomberg, and there are a lot of other professional news organizations, but then the list kind of drops off, and we are seeing our smaller local news franchises kind of wither. And so we're losing a sort of diversity of, like kind of local news that I think has informed and grounded people.
Maybe. But then I think of like this business, like my business, Software Engineering Daily, mostly one person business. I mean, I've done some outsourcing. I just hired somebody else full time. I'm able to produce a lot of content. A lot of people listen to it. I would say it's like I do my best to present a real version of the truth. And I would argue, like, what else can you do? Even if you're the New York Times, you get stuff wrong sometimes. Isn't that like where we're headed, where it's actually like maybe this is a beneficial thing where we get rid of this notion that New York Times is the arbiter of the truth, or Washington Post is the arbiter of truth, or anybody else on this short list. Maybe the reason this list is shortening is because people are fed up with the idea that there is a source of truth. Instead, you just have as many opinions as you can fit into your treadmill day, and that asymptotes towards your sense of reality. Is that such a bad thing?
I don't know. This is a different discussion. What you describe is kind of feels exhausting to me, because the truth is the truth. And it's not, and the truth cannot be like endlessly litigated, and facts can't be endlessly litigated. I mean, that's what we're seeing right now with, I think, the presidential administration. And sometimes you do want, you want a mainstream media, I think, to if everything is up for debate, even like a common set of facts, that we're sort of heading to a world of like endless, division between our political parties and the political extremes, and we're just this country will get more divided. I worry about where that ends.
What do you think of Instacart?
They recently raised money and
$1 billion valuation.
Yeah, and and my girlfriend uses it. In some ways, it is like the perfect Amazon hack. It's like the perfect anti-Amazon strategy for supermarkets. You can serve customers without building your own delivery mechanism. Amazon still hasn't figured out grocery stores. In fact, you could almost say Amazon Fresh is a little bit of a failure. And now they're starting physical grocery stores. And so, if you're a Costco or a Whole Foods, you worry that one day Amazon will get it right. So I think, we haven't seen very many of these independent, operators syndicate physical retail, to go and present, like a company called ShopRunner, tried it a couple of years ago and kind of, with their own Amazon Prime.
Enjoy's kind of doing it.
Yeah. I don't know much about them, but it feels like Instacart has been successful in some markets. They've got a kind of labor thing to figure out with contractors versus employees. But they do deliver a great service, and that, of course, in e-commerce is the main thing that matters.
Agreed. Well, Brad, I want to thank you for coming on the show. It's been great to talk to you. I've really enjoyed your books and look forward to your continued journalism.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks to Symfano for sponsoring Software Engineering Daily. Symfano is a custom engineering shop where senior engineers tackle big tech challenges while learning from each other. Check it out at symphano.com/sedaily. That's symphono.com/sedaily. Thanks again, Symfano.
Wow.